Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really big topic, dialectical materialism. And to help us understand it, we're going to break down the core ideas from a pretty dense but hugely influential book, Maurice Cornforth's Materialism and the Dialectical Method. Now, it puts forward a radical way of looking at the world, and our goal here is to unpack it step by step.
Right out of the gate, the book kicks things off with a pretty bold claim. It argues that philosophy isn't just some abstract academic exercise. Nope. Instead, it's a powerful tool, you might even say a weapon, that's fundamentally connected to the real-world interests and perspectives of different social classes.
So to really get our heads around this, we're going to walk through 6 key concepts from the book. You'll see that each one builds on the last, so by the time we're done, we should have a really clear picture of the argument Cornforth is making. Okay, let's jump right into that foundational idea that every philosophy, at its core, serves the interest of a particular class. So the argument here is that philosophies don't just pop into existence from the minds of brilliant thinkers working in a vacuum. The book suggests they're actually systematic ways of seeing the world that are shaped by where a class sits in society, their day-to-day lives, their relationships, and what they need to believe to justify their place in the world. And this, of course, raises a huge question. If philosophy has a side, what happens to the whole idea of objectivity? How can any philosophy claim to be telling the truth? Well, here's the answer the book puts forward. It claims that classes that benefit from an unequal system often need a worldview that kind of obscures or justifies that inequality, what it calls a false consciousness. But, it argues, a class that wants to end that system has a direct interest in seeing reality as clearly as possible, without any filters. And this, according to the book, is what allows its philosophy to get closer to objective truth.
All right, so now we get to what the book describes as the first great divide in all of philosophy.
Cornforth suggests that when you boil it all down, every philosophical system out there is really just trying to answer one single, fundamental question. And that question is all about the relationship between our minds and the world. Which one comes first? Is it our thoughts, our spirit, our ideas that shape the physical world? Or is it the other way around? Is the material world primary and our thoughts are just a product of it? How you answer that, Cornforth says, puts you into one of 2 major camps. So, on one side, you've got idealism. It says that spirit, or mind, or ideas are the ultimate reality, and the material world we see is just a consequence of that. And on the other side, you've got materialism, which flips that completely. It says the material world is the primary thing, and all our thoughts, ideas, and consciousness come from it. This table really helps make that distinction concrete. So, for an idealist, a thunderstorm might be caused by something spiritual, like an angry god. A materialist, on the other hand, is going to look for material causes, electrical charges building up in the clouds. And the same applies to society. An idealist might explain poverty by pointing to God's will or some fixed idea of human nature, while a materialist is going to look for the cause in the economic structure of society itself. So, before we can get to dialectical materialism, Cornforth takes a look at an older but super influential version of materialism that really set the stage for a lot of modern science. This is what's called mechanistic materialism, and it pictured the entire universe as just one giant, incredibly complex machine. Everything from planets orbiting the sun to an apple falling from a tree could be explained by the mechanical interactions of tiny, unchanging particles bumping into each other. Now you have to remember, back in its day, this was a huge deal. It was a revolutionary idea. It pushed back against religious superstition by looking for natural, mechanical causes for things. And it was really the philosophical engine that powered massive scientific breakthroughs like Newton's laws of motion or Harvey's discovery of how blood circulates. But, and this is a big but, the book argues that this machine-like view of the world has some really serious flaws. I mean, if the world is just a perfect machine, that raises a few tricky questions. So, here's the problem. First, a machine can't start itself, right? It needs someone or something to give it that first push. Second, it can't really create anything genuinely new. It just repeats its functions over and over. But maybe most importantly, it has a really hard time explaining social change because it tends to see people as these isolated, unchanging atoms, instead of as people who are constantly being shaped by and also shaping their society. And this is where the book introduces its solution, a totally different way of thinking called dialectics. Cornforth sets it up as the complete opposite of a more traditional approach, which he calls the metaphysical way of thinking. Now, the contrast here is what's really key. The metaphysical approach tends to look at things one by one in isolation,
almost like they're frozen in time, and it sorts them into these rigid either-or categories. The dialectical method, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. It insists that you have to look at things in their interconnection, as part of a process of constant change, and it specifically hones in on how opposing forces within a system are what actually drive that change forward.
So, when you combine that materialism we talked about, the idea that the physical world is primary, with this new dialectical method, you arrive at the book's central philosophy. And here are the core principles. First, reality isn't just a collection of stable things. It's a web of dynamic processes. Second, change doesn't need an outside push to get it started. It's just part of what matter is. And third, and this is the engine of it all, this change is driven from within, by the tension and struggle between contradictory forces that exist inside of every single process.
And this brings us to the grand finale, really, the ultimate point of the philosophy that Cornforth is laying out. It isn't just about understanding the world. It has a very clear, practical purpose.
And that's the whole point. This philosophy isn't designed for you to just sit back in an armchair and ponder the nature of the universe. It's meant to be a tool, a hands-on instrument for actually getting involved with the world and helping to shape where it goes next.
Cornforth brings in this famous line from Karl Marx, which just perfectly sums up the entire spirit of the project. The goal is no longer just to interpret the world, the point is to change it.
And that's the final thought this book leaves us with. If a philosophy, a whole system of ideas, isn't just a map of the world, but a tool, it kind of forces us to ask a pretty big question. What exactly are we trying to build with it? And that's the challenge. Thanks for joining us.